Hi everyone, in today's video we'll cover useEffect, which is one of the most important hooks in React. But before we get into the video, I would massively appreciate if you guys could leave a like and subscribe to my channel. It will help push my videos to more people and help the channel grow. We want to reach 100 subscribers before this month ends, so if you're someone who has just started learning React, consider subscribing. We have just started our YouTube channel and we post 3 to 4 videos per week. Also, if you have any questions or any feedback, leave it in the comments. I will answer all of them. And now, let's get in the video. Now before we start implementing useEffect, what is useEffect? What does it do? So by using useEffect, we will tell React that our component needs to do something after rendering. React will remember the function you passed and call it later after the DOM updates. So the first thing we need to do before using useEffect, we need to import it from React, just like that. And now to start using useEffect, we need to pass in useEffect 2 arguments. The very first one is gonna be a function, and inside of this function we can write some logic, what we want to do when the component gets rendered. And the second one is gonna be an empty array, and this empty array is called a dependency array, and this dependency array is basically going to control when we want to execute the code that we are going to call it here. But we'll back later and I'll explain more about it. But now let's just focus on the first argument and delete the dependency for now. So as I said earlier, this function is going to execute whenever a component gets rendered. So let's go to our example here where we have a count button, and this count button is gonna, whenever we click it, is gonna update our state, which will trigger our component to re-render. So this is a perfect example to show how useEffect works. So let me show you that. So we make this function here, and this function we can print any we can print a message to inside of it. Let's for example type console log and type this message, and if I save the changes and reload our page and go to our console, you can see that whenever we click this button, our message is gonna show. Okay, so now whenever we write any code, and by the way, this block of code called effect, so whenever we write any effect, it is going to execute it whenever our component renders, unless if we would control it when we use dependency array. So if I come here and use a dependency array and save the changes and reload our page, and you can see that our message gets printed when our component did mount, or when our component first loads. Okay, so when I start clicking this button, you can see that our message did not show again. Now I want to say that our example where we didn't use dependency array was not the correct way to do that. So basically that was incorrect way to do that. But what if I wanted to keep track of our state? Like for example, I want to keep a track of our count state, and I want to print a message when our count hits 10. So what we can do is we can go to our dependency array, and in that dependency array we can type the state that we wanted to keep track of. So in our example here we can type count state, and if I save the changes, reload our page, you can see that it gets our whenever we click the button, you can see that our message, it gets executed whenever we click this button. So when our component got rendered, useEffect is going to see if our state does change or not. If it does, then it's going to execute our code. And now if I start like clicking our button, you can see our message is showing in our console. So you can do whatever you want with code. You can set count to a 0 or write other some logic, like for example when we can put some logic to it. So let's say if count is equals to 10, then we wanted to console like we wanted to print a message in our console and say, for example, count is 10. If I refresh our page, you can see there is no message here because it's going to like see the value of our count. If it's not 10, then it's not gonna execute this function. So when our state hits 10, you can see that our message gets printed in our console. So I want to sum up what we have just learned so far with this example. So we have a 3 useEffect and we have 2 states, and each of these useEffect is going to print in our console a message to show which useEffect will work. So our first useEffect, we have effect without depend is going to. So in our first useEffect, we have a useEffect without a dependency array, and is going to print in our console useEffect without dependency array was called. And the same thing with the second one and the third one. We are going to print in our console messages, but in the second one we have a dependency array, an empty dependency array. In the last one we have a dependency array and with a count state. So it's going to keep track of the count one. If it has changed, then it's going to execute this function. Okay, so if I reload our page, you can see the 3 useEffects executes their function. So useEffect without dependency array was called, useEffect with a dependency array with a dependency array was called, useEffect with a dependency array that has a count 1 was called. So the 3 of these useEffects were called. Okay, but if I, for example, I want to click this button count 1, and this button is going to update the count 1, you can see that the first one and the last useEffect executed their function. So useEffect without a dependency array was called, useEffect with a dependency array that has a count 1 was called, and the second one didn't have called because it has an empty dependency array. And as we learned earlier, a useEffect with a empty dependency array is going to execute their function only once when the component first render. Okay, now if I click this button increment count 2, we only have useEffect without dependency array was called. So the only useEffect is going to execute their function is the first one, and because it doesn't have a dependency array, so it's going this useEffect is going to execute their function whenever something change. Whenever something change, a useEffect is going to the first useEffect is going to call their function. So the last thing I want to teach you guys about useEffect is a cleanup function. So essentially, cleanup function allows us to tidy up our code before our component unmounts. It basically prevents memory leaks and removes some unnecessary behaviors. So in our example here we have two buttons, the show component and remove component. So these two are going to toggle our component, and if you go to our components file, you can see we are using useEffect in this component. So it's going to this useEffect is going to execute a message when our component mounts in our screen. So if I go to our console here and reload our page, you can see our message got printed in the console. So as you can see here, when we click this message, this remove component, and click show component, you can see our message got printed in our screen. So what I want to do here, when we click remove component, I wanna to tell React to do some behavior before the component unmounts. So to do that, we will use a cleanup function, and the way we use cleanup function is by returning a function in the useEffect. So just like that, and we can tell React what to do. So I can, for example, come here and print a message, for example, component did unmount. And now if I remove this component, you can see this block of code got executed when the component unmounted. So we can do it one more time, and you can see component did unmount. So you can write any logic here. You can do some logic, and the way you do it is by returning a function inside the useEffect. Okay. So the takeaway here, when we are using cleanup function, you want to tell React to do a certain behavior when our component unmounts. When our component got removed in the screen. I remember when I started learning useEffect in the beginning, I was confused by the cleanup function and why we are using it. It turns out to prevent a memory leak, which is using some unnecessary space. Now usually when we are using useEffect, you are most likely going to fetch the data from an API and make a new state and set it to that data. Don't worry though, we will make another video to explain how this works in upcoming videos. And yeah, and if you have any questions, leave it in the comments down below. And yeah, if you like this video, please click the like button and subscribe. I will see you guys in the next video.